A new inmate walks into a maximum security yard and says nothing. No staring contests, no raised voice, no chest out. Yet psychologists who study first impressions say the brain reads a stranger's competence within a fraction of a second of seeing their face, before a single word gets spoken, which means the yard already decided how much it could get away with around him. What decided that, and why almost nobody controls it on purpose, is what most people get backwards about respect. Most people think respect comes from being louder, more aggressive, or higher in title than everyone else in the room. It doesn't. Respect is decided by a calculation running underneath conscious thought, and volume barely registers in it. To see that calculation clearly, you have to understand what the brain is actually keeping score of.
1. The hidden ledger. Every brain you meet is running a background calculation about you, not consciously, not on purpose. Two numbers, weighed against each other in silence. The first number is cost. How expensive would it be to disrespect this person? Would they push back? Would there be consequences? Social, professional, personal? The second number is value. What would I lose by losing access to this person? Their help, their approval, their resources, their protection. Respect isn't a feeling people choose to hand you. It's the output of those two numbers. High cost, high value, and you get treated carefully. Low cost, low value, and you get tested, interrupted, talked over. This is why some quiet people get more respect than loud ones in the same room. The ledger was never listening for volume. It was reading cost and value the entire time. Think about the last time a new person joined your workplace. Within the first week, without a single meeting about it, everyone already knew who could be interrupted freely and who couldn't. Nobody voted on it. Nobody announced it. The ledger just closed, quietly, in dozens of separate minds at once, and from that point on, everyone treated that person accordingly, often for months. But here's what makes this ledger dangerous. It opens before you've said a word.
2. The first read. Psychologists who study first impressions have found people judge strangers along two dimensions almost instantly: warmth and competence. Warmth answers one question: can I trust your intentions? Competence answers another: can I trust your ability? Respect lives almost entirely in the second one, and competence gets scored through posture, stillness, and the pace of your movements long before your first sentence lands. This is why walking into a room already tense, already over-explaining, already scanning faces for approval, quietly lowers your number before anyone has judged a single thing you've actually said. The ledger doesn't wait for your resume. It reads your nervous system first and asks questions later, which raises an obvious problem. If the number is already moving before you speak, what actually moves it? 3. The value account. The value side of the ledger isn't built from achievements. It's built from restraint. People with real competence tend to explain less, not more. They don't fill silence with proof. They let a pause sit in a conversation without rushing in to rescue it. Over-explaining reads as a request for approval, and a request for approval quietly transfers value away from you toward whoever you're asking. This is counterintuitive because most people try to raise their value number by talking more, listing credentials, working harder to be liked. The ledger reads it the opposite way. Every unnecessary explanation is a small withdrawal from an account you are trying to grow. Value, it turns out, is proven by what you don't need to say.
The cost account works differently. It doesn't get told, it gets tested. Somewhere early in almost every relationship, a new job, a new friend group, a new room, someone runs a small test, a mild interruption, a joke at your expense, a comment that pushes just past the line. It looks minor, it isn't. It's a probe. The other person's ledger is asking one question underneath the surface. What happens if I take a little more than I'm supposed to? How you respond in that exact moment sets your cost number for a long time afterward. Flinch, over-apologize, or laugh it off too fast, and the number drops. respond calm, direct, and unbothered, without anger, without a scene, and the number climbs immediately. Anger, strangely, doesn't raise cost the way most people assume it does. Anger reads as a loss of control, and a loss of control is cheap to exploit later, once the moment has passed and the anger has faded. These tests rarely announce themselves. A coworker forgets to loop you into an email chain. A friend cancels plans twice in a row without much explanation. A relative brings up an old nickname you've asked them to drop. Each one is small enough to let slide. That's exactly the point. The ledger is built out of things small enough to let slide, repeated often enough to become a pattern nobody questions anymore. Now here's where it gets complicated, because raising one number without the other doesn't work either.
5. The paradox. This is the tension most people never resolve. Raise value without raising cost and you become useful, praised, relied on, and quietly taken for granted. Raise cost without raising value and you become feared, avoided, resented, and eventually isolated. Neither one alone produces respect. Respect only appears where both numbers are high at the same time, someone worth being close to and expensive to cross. This is exactly where power-hungry people get it wrong. They chase cost. They perform intimidation, dominance, control. For a while, it works. Then the room starts avoiding them instead of respecting them, because fear and respect are not the same currency, even though from a distance they can look almost identical. You've probably worked for a manager like this, feared enough that nobody pushed back in meetings, but the moment that manager left the room, the real conversation started. The one where people quietly planned around them instead of with them. High cost, low value, and the ledger eventually collects on it. You can watch this exact mechanism play out somewhere most people would never expect to find it. 6. The ledger in action. Hostage negotiation training is built almost entirely around this idea, even if it's never called a ledger. Negotiators are trained to slow their speech and drop their pitch under pressure, not because a slow, low voice sounds impressive, but because a controlled voice signals a controlled nervous system, and a controlled nervous system is expensive to challenge. The person on the other end of that call can't see a badge, a title, or a file of credentials. All they have is a voice. So the entire cost and value calculation happens through tone, pacing, and silence alone. Proof that respect was never really about the words being said, only about what the voice underneath them was signaling the whole time. Airline pilots and emergency room doctors get trained in a similar direction, for the same underlying reason. In a crisis, the loudest voice in the room is rarely the one people follow. The one they follow is the voice that doesn't speed up. Calm under real pressure is one of the few signals that's almost impossible to fake convincingly, which is exactly why it carries so much weight with the ledger.
7. Reading the room before it speaks. Once you can see the ledger, you start predicting things you couldn't predict before. You can spot before a meeting even starts who is about to get interrupted the most, usually the person whose posture apologizes before they've said a word. You can predict how someone will react the first time you push back on them, because how a person defends their own cost number tells you almost everything about how they were treated long before you ever met them. And you can predict with uncomfortable accuracy exactly who a room will actually listen to. It's almost never the loudest person in it. You can also predict conflict before it happens. Watch two people who are quietly competing for the same cost and value position in a group. A new hire and a longtime employee, two friends vying for the same role in a friend group. And you can tell days in advance exactly where the tension is going to surface first. It will show up at the point where one of their ledgers gets tested and doesn't hold. 8. When the ledger drops. One more piece matters because everyone's cost number takes a hit eventually. A mistake in front of others, a moment of being caught off guard, a boundary you didn't enforce in time. The instinct is to overcorrect, explain more, apologize repeatedly, prove yourself twice as hard in the next 5 minutes. That instinct is exactly backwards because it withdraws from value while you're trying to rebuild cost, and both numbers drop at once. The actual repair is smaller than people expect. One calm correction, one boundary held cleanly the next time it's tested. No speech about it. The ledger doesn't need an explanation for the drop. It only needs new evidence. If this framework is starting to click, go ahead and tap like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep going.
Here's how this shows up in real moments. In a meeting, when someone talks over you, Don't raise your voice or rush to finish faster. Pause, hold for one extra beat, then continue at the same pace you were already at. That single pause deposits more into your cost account than any comeback ever could. On a first date or in a new friendship, resist the urge to over-explain your job, your plans, your past. Let a question sit unanswered a little longer than feels comfortable, because that restraint is what builds value. With family, when an old dynamic tries to pull you back into an old role, respond once, calmly, and let the silence afterward do the rest of the work. Repeating yourself only withdraws from the account you just built. Command respect was never the right phrase. You don't command it, you reveal it, through the small moments nobody thinks are being watched. The ledger was open the entire time. Most people just never knew it was there. The next time you feel the urge to prove yourself to a room, stop. Watch what happens when you say less instead. The room was never grading your words. It was grading what you did before you ever needed to say anything at all.